let's go over some security best practices. Some best practices for Jenkins. Try to keep your Jenkins shielded from the internet. Try using firewall rules and put Jenkins behind a VPN if possible. If you're on a cloud provider that provides you with a firewall in front of your machine, then you can use those. You just block all the ports and you only allow access to your office IP or your VPN if you have VPN running. Running a VPN is a little bit out of scope of this course, but it's the best solution to protect your business tools. Jenkins is a tool that you should only use internally. There's no need for any external people to have access to it. So it's best to shield it away from the internet and use firewall rules and a VPN to allow only the people who are working in a company to have access to it. If you put it behind a firewall, you will need to whitelist the Bitbucket and GitHub IP address for push requests. So if you're going to use push requests, then you're going to have to look up in the documentation of GitHub and Bitbucket the IP address they use, and that IP address you will need to whitelist in your firewall. In the past, there were security vulnerabilities discovered that can be exploited without even being logged in. So it's better to keep Jenkins shielded away from the internet. Because if you would be using a version that is 1 year old, your Jenkins is vulnerable and can potentially be hacked, and then hackers can install malware on it and so on. So it's best to make sure that this cannot happen. Keep also your Jenkins up to date. There are sometimes security vulnerabilities that come out for Jenkins. There are unfortunately still a lot of people who run Jenkins in public space, which means that attackers can try and get into it. So some people will try and scan the internet on Jenkins instances running public that are old enough to be exploited. So keep your Jenkins up to date and try to reduce access from the internet. Always upgrade to the latest version. If you want a stable version, use the LTS version, the long-term support edition. That is if you want the stable version. That one is less updated than the last one. If you're using Docker, you can use the LTS or the latest stack and do a Docker or Docker Compose pull and restart the container to get the latest version. You will also have to read the changelog. In the changelog, it will show you what changes have been made to the latest version of Jenkins, and maybe some things changed, maybe you have to take some action on some things, so it's always useful to read the changelog. Always keep the plugins up to date as well. When you install plugins, make sure you keep those up to date as well. The latest versions of Jenkins also give you some alerts. If bugs are found in plugins, it gives you a warning to update. But it's good to just always keep them up to date. Also configure authentication and authorization in Jenkins. If you don't want to give administrator access to your users, make sure that they cannot execute scripts that can give them elevated permissions. So you might say this user can only execute one job. This user can only edit and execute one job. Then also make sure that you don't give him too much permissions so that he can maybe run some scripts to then read files from the file system that can give him administrator privileges. Keep in mind that administrators can always decrypt credentials. And use OneLogin, LDAP, or a centralized directory to manage the users. That's what I'm going to cover in the next lecture. So the next lecture will be about authentication and authorization. Authentication, I will be using OneLogin, and authorization I will explain in a demo. Also, don't use weak passwords and logins. That's an obvious one.